Hello everyone, good afternoon. Today's session consists of wages, labor unions, and also the role of labor in the economy. I'm Professor Bias. We'll get started with today's session. Labor unions have been created in order to create an environment for safety, income, and security, and stability of employment in the labor market. And their establishment dates back to the mid-1940s, 1950s, early 60s, and so on. And what labor unions usually do is they seek to create at least certain major objectives for the industry and for the workers. And the industry, in this case, may be heavily unionized or not be under a union, but the labor unions, for the most part, they seek an objective to employ all of their members that are part of the union, not necessarily all workers, but only the workers that are part of the union, that become part of a unionized labor, organized labor, and get employment in the labor market. They also attempt to maximize the total wage bill for all of their workers given the hours that they work, and to maximize the income, in some cases, for limited number of union members. That is, that only those that belong to the union could be the ones that have the higher income and the higher pay for the wages for the service they provide. Everybody else that is not part of the union may not reap these benefits. So unions, although they have good conditions for their workers, are sometimes criticized for the lack of efficiency, and in some cases, various industries are under heavy unions and a heavy burden and heavy scrutiny. So let's take a look at the union conditions and how the unions work, the union model, as well as the bargaining for wages, and when it comes to what do they do. Let's analyze what does it mean to have total maximized wage bill. The maximizing of the total wage bill, in this case, as one of the main objectives, is the total wage bill. It's the one that will be paid to the members of the union that is equivalent to the wage rate that they are paid times the number of hours worked. And in some cases, if they work additional hours, they need to pay 1.5 to 2 times more over the wage rate, and they are guaranteed specific hours of work with specific benefits, with a specific time off, and with specific non-exclusionary work conditions, meaning paid vacations, sick time leave, etc. Maximize all of the total wage bill and all of the benefits that this particular worker may be entitled and qualified for under the union. It could be good, but sometimes it could be a burden depending on the industry to the company or the firm or to the market. Within the labor union wage model, we have wages in the vertical axis and the quantity of labor employed in the horizontal axis, and the demand for labor that is downward sloping, illustrated by this violet red looking downward sloping demand curve. And it specifies 3 different wages. Wage 3, it means the wage that is paid to a limited number of union members. So if you want to be paid the highest wage, at a wage of $30, for example, the highest wage, $30 for a union member, the quantity of labor employed is going to be significantly small, closer to 0. Small number of the union members are going to be paid a higher wage, but the demand for that labor at a higher wage is going to be a small quantity. If you want to maximize the total wage bill by employing as many members as possible with the higher number of hours and higher pay, you can have wage 2, for example, $20 an hour, and the quantity of labor employed increases slightly when you maximize the total wage bill for the employees that are working certain number of hours under the union, meaning guaranteed hour pay. And if you want to employ all of the members that are part of the union, exclusively all unionized labor, all members, not excluded, we assume total union membership for all of the individual members. They can get paid a lower wage, like 10 for example, and the quantity of labor employed will be even higher. For the most part, unions tend to have high income wages, those that become part of the union. So they're going to operate typically on the maximizing total wage bill and under the maximizing income for the limited members or the exclusive members of the union, which are typically lower quantities. Not everybody gets to be part of the union. Not everybody gets to be part of a certain industry that is unionized, because sometimes if you're not part of the union, you cannot get that job, and the union members may prohibit someone else to enter that industry because they're taking off their employment, etc. So let's analyze this further. The objectives of unions continue. If you want to maximize the income for a limited number of union members, there are several things. A union may prefer to maximize the income for a limited number of union members, meaning for the exclusive members, those with the most skills, with the higher influence, with higher seniority, with the higher experience, with the higher time, or the founding members of the union in that industry. They want to pay a higher wage for that specific quantity of workers, or a combination of both. Limited high income pay for certain unions with a maximizing total wage bill for the number of hours worked, and then everybody else that just entered the industry. You could pay all three wages depending on where they are in the union. And this is done typically by obtaining what is called rehiring rights, or hiring rights, hiring income rights, etc. As time goes by, your wages go from the general category to the maximizing total wage bill, and all the way up to the limited number of union members, exclusive membership in this case, with the higher influence and the higher ability and the higher seniority power. Now, the wage employment trade-off means that it's possible for unions to receive higher wage rates. Most people are aware that unions have a higher wage rate than traditional employment. They have higher benefits, guarantee hours, overtime pay, double time, etc. And on average, wages are a little bit higher, about 15 to 25% higher. The consequences are that since they limit their membership and who gets to be part of the union, there could be some unemployment as an unintended consequences in that industry, because the people are limited to enter in the industry if they don't become part of the union, or if they don't receive the training from the union, etc. So it could be a technical trade-off here in the market. So unions were created originally during the middle-class America time frame in the 50s and 60s. They took a strong hold in the unionized, organized labor. They had good intentions to guarantee 40-hour week, to guarantee, for example, the 9-to-5 job from the morning to the afternoon, with some benefits, with some particular vacations, etc. Those things are good. But there's a trade-off when essentially the union wants more. That could be a consequential effect. The wage employment trade-off really depends, it's essentially on the demand for labor, the elasticity for labor, whether or not the firms really need this labor or not. If they don't need the labor, then the union does not really have a lot of power. If the industry and the firms really do need the labor, and the labor is unionized or organized, then there could be a significant effect. The elasticity and the demand for labor plays a crucial role. The elasticity of demand for labor means how responsive are firms to demand that labor, whether it's unionized or not unionized in the market. Let's analyze the elasticity. Consider two different models. Model A with inelastic demand. Inelastic demand is steeper. Model B with a highly elastic demand, which is a little bit flatter. In the wage scenario for Model A under Union A, if you notice here at wage 1, the quantity demanded at point 1 is equivalent to Q1. Since we have inelastic demand, if the wage rate is increased up by the union ability to ask for higher wages, the firm is going to demand fewer workers to point 2, a little bit less quantity 2, but the quantity change is going to be relatively small because they really need that labor. When it's inelastic demand, inelastic means it's less than 1, so we have a lower elasticity of demand for labor. The smaller the elasticity, the smaller the cutback for labor, and the higher the wage rate. If you look at the condition of the elastic demand, which is a little bit flatter, a little bit more horizontal, when it's elastic demand, we have condition when it's greater than 1. If the union asks for a higher wage, or if we have a higher wage, similar here, higher the wage from wage 1, we have quantity 1. Notice how at quantity 1, it actually drops significantly, a lot more. when you increase the wage from wage 1 to wage 2, the quantity drops significantly more. The space between the quantity of labor hired increases due to the elastic demand. This means that elastic demand is that whoever is demanding this labor is highly responsive. If you increase the wage, they're going to hire a lot less. There's other people that we can hire to replace that labor due to the higher wage. With the inelastic demand, it's not so much. You have very limited options. You can increase the wage, demand a little bit less, but you have few options, few substitutes. So unions are very organized, very effective to some extent. Labor unions try to meet their objectives by either influencing certain factors or significant factors in the market. They attempt to even influence the elasticity demand for labor, meaning making their labor exclusive so that the elasticity is as small as possible and there's not a significant response by the firms. The actual demand for labor that is higher in the industry, the supply of labor by making their membership exclusive or non-exclusive, etc. And this particular three categories are crucial when it comes to who gets to work under unionized labor. Companies, for the most part, may not always like union labor because you have to meet their demands. You have to meet their guidelines, or there's a compromise between the firms, the industry, and the union, and so on. But it does benefit the workers to some extent. So how does it affect the elasticity demand for union labor? So how the union actually affects the elasticity demand for union labor? A union labor essentially looks for ways to lower the elasticity, to make sure the elasticity is as small as possible. Because if you recall it, if you have low elasticity, the demand is very steep. If you increase the wage increases a lot, but the quantity demanded doesn't change much. So in this case, they attempt to influence the elasticity of demand for its labor, and it does it mainly by attempting to reduce any potential substitute, any potential external labor, any potential replacement of the labor they offer, or by simply making the industry very specific. The availability of close substitutes is crucial because it protects, if you have a lot of substitutes, the labor is easily replaceable. Other substitutes means other people that can do the job that you're doing. And if you limit the availability of substitutes of the products of production, unions might attempt to impose restrictions. Who can work in that industry, who cannot work in that industry, and also impose restrictions on goods coming from the rest of the world, like on imports. Because if you produce products domestically, and if you allow imports from other parts of the world, you now have foreign competition. So that's a substitute for the product. You may not limit the labor locally, you may control it with the union power, but you now have companies that can import products from abroad, and they may attempt to impose import restrictions like licenses, permits, taxes, fees, requirements, etc., or lobby heavily for that. Another factor is the influence on the substitutability factors, the availability of substitute factors of production, resources of production. Union labor has two general substitutes: non-union members, which are not part of the union, non-union labor that don't have the strong demands like the union, and certain types of technology, machinery, and plant and equipment. A lot of the times unions are good when they have good productivity factors, when their members are on point. Sometimes unions are not as good because when you join a union, you have guaranteed income, guaranteed pay, guaranteed vacation, guaranteed benefits, and you cannot get easily fired if you're part of the union. Non-union members may not have these benefits fully. So it really depends as to how the union really contributes to the production of the good. Unions are likely to oppose the relaxation on immigration laws, as well as inclusion laws, and also as well as machinery and technology and plant equipment that can be used as a substitute for labor. Because nowadays technology is actually replacing people at a faster rate that people used to replace and compete with other people. This has been done in you can actually see this in the actual retail centers, where you go to the stores and you now have automatic checkout machines and the regular traditional cashiers, physical cashiers. And some companies, you can think of one that comes to mind, like Stater Brothers, has unionized labor that they assure that they're not going to be replaced fully by the automatic machines, just like banks have automatic tellers, automatic ATMs, and the regular traditional banker. So opposing the immigration laws is also a very important one, because you have people coming from the rest of the world that are now competing with the labor, traditional labor, and they become non-union members at the beginning. Later on, they could become part of the union, possibly, and they compete. Everybody competes with each other in the labor market. Every individual person that is looking for employment, seeking for work, is competing with the other members of the economy, whether they are unionized, non-unionized, and so on. And if you're part of the union, you want to protect your employment against anybody else, like immigration or people from a different part of the world. When we're looking at influencing or affecting the demand for union labor, they actually do a lot in their power to increase product demand, meaning that unions occasionally urge people or the public to buy products that are produced by union members or domestic companies, or made domestically, made in the USA, made by an American company in the case of the US, or just in general, make it very patriotic. Buy domestic, consume domestic, and spend domestic, made in America. Push in this particular case of consumption to support local products in case they're competing with the international sector, by affecting the demand for the product, by attempting the consumer to purchase that good. Because if you increase the consumption of the good, then firms have to employ more people to produce that product. So any products that are made in the USA require labor, employment of people. And if you employ more people, then that means that they can increase the number of their union members and have job security and job safety in the market. So what are some of the practices of labor unions? Labor unions continue to affect the demand for labor and for union labor by increasing potentially the marginal physical product of the product that they're producing in this case. So if unions can increase the productivity of their members by making their members more productive, and the industry or the firms or the companies are going to demand more unionized, skill-based labor, because they are organized, they have a trajectory to some extent of consistency and reliability, and then they may have the license and are backed by the union and protected by the union. So in this case, you can make your workers more productive, increasing the marginal physical productivity of the members of your union, making sure that they meet certain requirements to work under the union and to be part of the union so they can offer skill-based labor. Think about, in this case, licenses that they require, special training, special skill sets, and so on within their labor pool. And members undertake training programs all of the time to stay updated. At least those are highly productive unions. Then you have some that are, have low productivity. Some members have really low productivity. But others have really good productivity. So unions, for the most part, tend to have a good and a bad view depending on who you ask. Now, affecting the supply of union labor, this means how the supply of the actual labor that is part of the union. We have the conditions of a closed shop union labor, and this is the case where an organization in which an employee must be part of the union before him or her, or the actual person, depending on who it is, doesn't matter nowadays, can be hired. A closed shop is that any organization in the industry commits to only hiring someone that is part of a union labor, or part of a union. Or the union, if it already has heavy influence in the industry, or in this case in the market, it has to agree with the organization, the firm, or the industry that industry is only going to hire union-based labor, no one else. Or they agree to only 75% union labor, you have to meet that category, and you can hire 25% non-union labor anywhere else. But the majority has to be union laborers. I know of programs and actual big constructions that are taking place in Southern California that demand actual union labor only. And that's important. A union shop, in this case, it's an organization in which a worker may not be required to be part of the union. It doesn't have to be part of the union to be hired under the industry or the company or the organization. It's not required for them to be a member of the union to be hired, but in the transition of employment and while this person works in the particular industry, they must become a member of the union after being employed. So it's like, okay, we'll let you be employed, but you have to sign into the union. You don't have to be active in the union, but you have to be part of the union. So it really depends. A union shop is when the union is more inclusive to the public, to be part of the organization, part of the industry, but then you get to be part of the union. I think this one is more flexible. The union shop. The closed shop is like, we're not taking anybody else that's not part of our union. We're not even going to deal with you. We don't want to talk to you. The closed shop is like, don't mess with our jobs. You're not going to be part of our industry. It's very exclusive. Closed. This is often referred to as exclusive union shop. Exclusive closed union shop. This one of the union shop is the inclusive shop. Inclusive industries. In the university setting, we have certain unions that are important, such as the CFA, the California Faculty Association Union. Really does promote a lot of benefits to its faculty. It's optional. We have the Teachers Union Associations for unified school districts, just like there's police unions that police officers are part of, industry unions, the steel unions, and so on. And unions have what is called a collective bargaining capability. And collective bargaining is powerful because since most of the members are part of the union to begin with, they have the ability to influence wages. And that is the process whereby wage rates and other issues of importance that are considered priority by the union are determined by a union bargaining power. And most of the time, the management or the organizers are acting on behalf of the union members, and the organization or the company or the firm have limited say, and they go into negotiations with the union if there's strong bargaining power. The stronger the union, the greater the collective bargaining power. The greater the collective bargaining power, the greater the potential benefits the union members get. The weaker the industry, the weaker the union, or just in general, if there's a low union activity, then the collective bargaining is low, and the wages are often set as to the strength of the union. Very important conditions of bargaining power. Here we have the economic model for a successful collective bargaining ability of a union to ask for higher wages. Let's analyze this wage labor union model. This is considered the wage union labor model when there's a collective bargaining ability of union members to influence the wages. We have the demand curve that is downward sloping, indicated by the red curve. The supply curve, which is upward sloping, indicated by the blue supply curve. Wage rates on the vertical axis. The quantity of labor in the horizontal axis. If you recall, where demand and supply intersect one another under free marketability, we determine the equilibrium market wage of wage number 1. This is the equilibrium wage at point A, and we hire quantity of labor 1, Q1. This is equilibrium without any external forces. The supply curve indicates the supply of labor available in the market, and if they are supplying labor under union bargaining power, they're going to lobby or essentially organize themselves to petition the demanders of this employment. Again, the demand for labor is the organization that they're going to be hired by, and the supply of labor is the vertical axis. So the supply of labor are the workers, the union workers, and the demand curve is the organization and the firms that demand these workers. So the supply curve here, or the union, which controls the labor, it says that no one will work for less than the wage 2, the union wage. This is what the union wants. Our supply of labor is unionized. If you want to demand this labor for your production of your firm, you're going to pay us a higher wage, $20 instead of 10. Wage 1, $10. Wage 2, 20. So the union is going to ask for a higher wage if you really want to hire us as the workers. So this is the bargaining, where the bargaining starts. The union is asking for a higher wage above the equilibrium. Above the equilibrium. So the supply of labor under the union is asking for a higher wage. So the firm says the only way I can offer that wage, if I do accept that wage, is by paying you that higher wage at a higher point B, but I'm only going to hire quantity of 2 of labor. Specific quantity of labor. Under normal conditions, without your wage demands, we can pay everybody wage 1, $10, and we hire a lot of people. Since you're asking for a higher wage under unionized supply of labor, I can pay you that higher wage if I do agree on those terms, but we're only going to demand a specific quantity, lower or fewer units than normal conditions. And most of the time that happens, unless the bargaining ability is weak. And if the bargaining ability is weak, then the union is not too strong and not successful. If there's a strong bargaining power, then the union gets the higher wage. And if there's no agreement, if the unions or the union members go on strike. And the purpose of the strike is to convince management that the supply of their labor is what the unions say it is. And that the supply of their labor offers a skill set and it has what the industry needs, and they should be paid the higher wage, which is why they're bargaining for a higher wage. So the success really depends on the ability of the union to provide a successful strike to show the employers or the organizations that their employees are demanding something that is suitable for the industry at a higher wage rate. So the success really depends on the ability of a striking union employees to prevent non-striking and non-union employees from working the job that the union is asking for a higher wage. So essentially, we have cases in the past where people go out and protest for higher wages. And the firms still have to produce the product, still have to operate, and still have to provide the service. So they go out and hire non-union members. They replace the labor for a short term of time, temporarily, because things have to keep going. Not because you have 1,000 people protesting, you're not going to produce. They go and replace these people temporarily and hire someone else to provide that product until they reach an agreement with the union. So sometimes the union attempts to prevent that from happening. If all of their union members go on strike to convince management that the supply of their labor curve, that their labor it's what they say it is, and they need the higher wage, then you have no people to produce that product. So they also need to make sure that the people that are available, that are not part of the union, non-union members, and other individuals that are not striking, are not hired by the employer or management at a lower wage rate, and replace them. So part of the agreement is, in some cases, is that you're not going to replace it with someone else if we go on strike. In this case, they deserve the right to strike if the conditions are unfair, and if they need to hire someone else, it could only be done temporarily until the agreement and the management agrees with the union what the terms will be. And we have protests all of the time. In the market, or most of the time, the union actually does have some form of the strike, or the union with the strike does come to an agreement with the organization. And sometimes they get the full benefits and the higher wage, and sometimes they settle somewhere in between, like a compromise of both. If they don't reach a compromise, then the strike continues on and on. But most of the time, they reach an agreement. In the market, we have a certain category of firms that are considered to be a monopsony. Monopsonies are essentially a specific type of firm. And a monopsony is a single buyer of labor and has the ability to influence labor and buying power for who it hires. So monopsonies tend to typically have the influence to hire labor and has buying power. And the characteristics of a monopsony is a single buyer of goods and a single employer. The market is highly immobile. So basically the people have no choice but to work for this firm. And the monopsony may have the ability to be a wage maker. In other words, it tells the people, hey, I'm only going to pay you this X amount of dollars as a wage, take it or leave it. Sometimes unions organize within a monopsony and attempt to bargain for a better wage. If it's the only company that's there and the company is undertreating their employees and underpaying them, employees can organize and attempt to bargain for a higher wage if they have no option, and if that's a single company. So it's a very interesting scenario. We're going to have the monopsony model to also model the effects of the union. The monopsony cannot buy any additional units of factors, in this case, like labor. Think of factors, I keep saying, think of factors as the resource that they need to produce a good or service. And if we're using resources such as people and individuals, we're using labor. So a monopsony cannot hire any additional units of labor without increasing the price or the wage it pays for that labor, because the supply of labor, in this case, it's upward sloping, and if you have an upward sloping supply curve, more people are going to want to work at a higher wage, and they're also faced with a market supply of labor. So, and that labor could be either unionized or not unionized, but they still have to pay them a higher wage if they really want to hire more people. Examples of monopsony power in the monopsony firms or monopsony industries: the pharmaceutical industry could be considered to some extent a monopsony, although nurses are always paid really well. So you can just say that it comes with the skill set, the ability, and the training. Professional sports teams, such as the NFL, the NBA, MLS, and so I would use the Major League Soccer here to be more of a wage maker, because all of the other professional sports teams actually pay their athletes pretty well, unless we're talking about the people that work for the companies or for the teams, like the employees, the regular employees, like the janitor, the staff, and so on, like the people that clean the actual fields. So we need to differentiate those people with the athletes. But since we're looking at the athletes, I would say MLS still under this category, because MLS is known for having a cap on the salary that they pay their athletes, and they also have an extra cap as to what's the maximum they can pay the superstar athletes. So the Major League Soccer will fall under this particular category, it's a monopsony power. And you have teachers with the labor unions. So most of the time we'll go back and forth between the labor unions for teachers and the professional athletes monopsony model. But most of the time we see teachers that go on strike. You know, athletes get paid for doing something that is beneficial to them. They like it, they enjoy it, they're good at it, they play well, they perform, they get paid, they get every treatment, they get the celebrity status and so on, so they rarely complain. They rarely strike, although they can. Teachers, on the other hand, we have seen strikes from LAUSD or other teachers associations that often go on strike because you technically only have, for example, certain places where you can work as a teacher. And teachers have the common perception that are underpaid. That's because if they go work in the industry as educators, they may have a wage that they have set by the monopsony, so wage maker, and so on, depending on the actual industry. Now teachers can work charter, private, public, and specify school districts and so on, depending on what teachers. But for the most part, that's the common perception, that they often go on strike due to some less than ideal categories. Let's analyze this analysis. A monopsony, which is a single firm, will employ a quantity of labor, if it's teacher labor, for example, where the marginal revenue product of that labor is greater or equal to the marginal resource cost of the labor. So in other words, the marginal revenue product in this case is if your marginal revenue product, if your ability to contribute to the firm is greater or equal to the cost of you to be employed, then you're hired. If your marginal resource product, your ability to contribute is less than your costs, you're not going to be hired. So you got to be productive, contribute, and have a greater productivity or equivalent to the marginal resource cost. In the first model as indicated here, I have it as model B. Model B indicates the wage rate on the vertical axis and the quantity of labor in the horizontal axis. And we have the MRP curve, the marginal revenue curve, marginal revenue product curve. The marginal revenue product curve, which is downward sloping, is equivalent to the demand for labor for a particular competitive industry, although not for a monopsony. And the marginal factor cost, which is the marginal resource cost here. The marginal resource cost and the supply of labor here. Under normal conditions, where the supply of labor intersects the marginal revenue product of labor people are employed. Under this category, or this particular rule of employment by the monopsony, where MRP, where marginal revenue product of labor, which is the downward sloping curve, is equivalent to the marginal resource cost, which is this light blue curve, the firm will hire a quantity of labor, which is Q1. And it will hire this quantity of labor, and for this supply of labor, it's going to actually pay a wage rate that is below the indicated marginal MRP. This is important because this helps explain why some teachers may be underpaid. According to this model, where marginal revenue product MRP intersects the marginal factor cost or the marginal resource cost curve, at this particular point, the firm is going to employ a quantity of labor from the market supply curve, those that are supplying labor. They're going to hire labor, and they're going to pay them a wage that is set by the monopsony, which is a lot lower than what they could pay in the market. So this is where you see the lower wages are paid for those that are supplying labor, and they're higher, and their normal conditions, where the supply of labor is equivalent to this red curve here, they would be higher here at a higher wage, but they're not because the monopsony controls the market. The monopsony controls the market, controls the industry. You can only work for them. They will hire where MRP is equal to MRFC, and they will hire a specific quantity of labor and pay them a low wage. Although they could pay a higher wage, equivalent to their MFC where MRP is. They could pay that wage, but they're not. So this is when the union comes in and argues for a higher wage. This wage is too low. We don't want this wage. We know you could pay us a little bit more, so we're going to start organizing and bargain for a higher wage, which is this solid line here. The solid line that you're seeing that is not here, because they know that this gap here is potentially a potential higher wage. So what we see here in the second model, wage rate on the vertical axis, quantity of labor on the horizontal axis, is that the supply of labor that is underpaid by the monopsony, a low wage, according to their view. If they organize, they're going to demand a higher wage of 2 here, and they are going to demand for more people to be hired and have better wages, better benefits, higher wage pay in this case, and they're going to set their own marginal fixed cost here, that's how much they should get paid. That can increase the employment from Q1 to Q2, and although the supply of labor indicates they should hire more people, the firm is only going to hire where MRP intersects that wage. With MRP, with this is crucial, the intersections, where those intersections occur. Where this MRP intersects that demanded wage by the supply of labor organizers, which are now the union here. If they want a higher wage the firm may offer them that higher wage here, but only hire a little bit more people. They're not going to hire all the way here. That's not going to happen. They're only going to hire a little bit more and potentially offer the higher wage. And sometimes they could argue that they can pay them more, but have temporary hire freezes, where they don't hire anybody else, but they pay the people that are there the higher wage. It's possible. It really depends. So this model, the wage model number 2, indicates, again, recognizing that the wage is low, the individuals organize and form some form of demands to increase their wage to get paid a little bit more according to their MRP, or MRP here, marginal revenue product. Again, this is the productivity of the labor contribution. The higher wage for the productivity, according to supply of labor, hire a little bit more. Sometimes that bargaining works, and sometimes it doesn't. In some cases, the success of increasing this wage all the way up here, it really depends on the success of the bargaining ability of the union to ask for a higher wage. And if the wage is agreed upon by two parties, those that are supplying labor and demanding a higher wage, they may get that higher wage and get a little bit more people to get hired. Or the firm, which is the monopsony, can say, nope, we're not gonna take your case. We're gonna keep you at that wage, and the model doesn't change. The model stays the same. Low wages, small quantity of people hired, and that's it. But if the people that are asking for a higher wage, based on their marginal revenue product, do get that wage, they get the higher wage with slightly higher people quantity increases in people employed. Or sometimes the firm says, okay, we can give you that higher wage if you really want that wage with extra benefits, but we're going to keep the number of people employed the same, fixed. Or we may even offer you a little bit more and just have the same number of people employed, fixed, the same. Temporary, freezing employment. We're not hiring anybody else, but can give you the benefits. And sometimes the union takes it, depending on their demands. And different industries provide different types of salaries, and different teachers are paid differently. So do we have some form of wage differentials across industries, across labor sectors? Yes. Union members may get higher wages. They may be more productive or may not. It depends on the industry, depends on the union. College degrees have different earning abilities. A professional degree, PhD, and advanced degree may have a higher earning ability than a bachelor's degree. So the professional degrees like licenses, masters, PhDs, advanced trainings, leadership trainings, and so on, may have a slightly higher annual earning ability than those with the regular traditional bachelors. And the bachelors have a greater ability of those with associate's degree, and anybody above associates, above bachelors, and above masters may have a higher earning ability than those with a high school diploma. Although this is the traditional role of education with wage differentials. Wage differential states that different groups, different individuals, different parties, different demographics may have different incomes or different wages throughout their professional employment. And here we have, for example, at the age of 44, the average high school grad may be earning roughly about $40,000. Associate's degree about $50,000. College degree with a bachelor's about $70,000. Masters and above, you have above $100,000 barrier in your early 40s and mid 50s. And it's also the same with unions. The greater time you are in a union, the greater your wage, the greater your benefits, and so on. That was the first concept at the beginning. And of course, different industries. I would say this is a traditional way of looking at educational attainment. Sometimes you have highly successful people that may just have a high school diploma and make thousands of dollars, or you may have high school dropouts that did not take the educational route and make thousands of dollars. So this is the traditional way of looking at the educational attainment, but sometimes you do have those exceptions in the market. But it really comes to self-productivity. Even within this, self-productivity. If you put a professional degree person that is a high income earner with a high school diploma person only that is a high income earner as well, it has to do with their productivities and their habits and their ability to contribute and what they're doing. Both could be doing good, but traditionally some people are still stuck with lower income with only high school degrees. The effects of unions on the actual wage, it do show that unions have increased their members' benefits, their wages, their compensation packages substantially, and others have not done so at all. Other unions may be ineffective. The effect really depends on the ability of the union to be strong enough or not strong enough. So the union, non-union wage differential can actually differ quite a bit from different times and different years. The union members may get a little bit more. Those that are not a part of the union may get a little bit less, or in some cases vice versa. It really depends across the industries and among the actual individuals themselves. Thank you everyone for joining today's session in regards to unions, wages, and the labor market. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.